My name is Don Handa. I'm the curator at the Nairobi Contemporary Art Institute. This evening's conversation is going to be between Beatrice Wanjiku and Priscilla Kennedy, and the conversation is moderated by Peter Kamwathi. Tonight's talk makes reference to two works in particular, the works of these two artists featured in the exhibition, Breaking Bread, Blue Blood, and The Substance of Things, both of which are featured in Notes on Friendship, an ongoing exhibition, which is a collaboration between the Nairobi Contemporary Art Institute and the Savannah Center for Contemporary Art. In this conversation, we'll explore themes around the body, health, the transformation, and also reflect on the process, identity, and the role of art in voicing or speaking to our relationship with our bodies as how we live through them and how they are sites of different kinds of social and political events and how they're transformed and shaped by this. I'm going to very briefly introduce our speakers. Priscilla Kennedy is a Ghanaian artist whose work interrogates memory, identity, and the body through multidisciplinary forms, including installation, light work, and painting. She is a graduate of the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology and a member of Black Star Lines, and her practice explores race, sexuality, and femininity through the metaphor of the octopus, presenting the body as a mutable, shifting entity. Her pieces examine how personal and historical narratives collide and reshape identity. Kennedy has received numerous accolades, including the First Merit Award at the 2017 Barclays Atelier competition, the 2022 Yaya Santewa Prize, and her work has been exhibited in Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Uruguay, and Malta. Recent solo exhibitions include 1,000 Disguises in 2023 and Levitating in Thin Spaces in 2024, while she continues to challenge perception through poetic and immersive art forms. Beatrice Wanjiku is a celebrated Kenyan artist whose introspective work explores the psyche, identity, and emotional complexity of the human condition. Her canvases, marked by haunting abstract triggers, interrogate societal norms and internal conflicts, drawing from her lived experience and environment. With a career that spans prestigious exhibitions such as the Sharjah Architecture Triennial, the Venice Biennial, the Mercosur Biennial, Wanjiku has received numerous fellowships and residencies, and her work is a profound mirror into the layered and often fragile structures that define individual and collective realities. Our moderator this evening, Peter Kamwathi, attends to various communal, social, and economic cultural stances in contemporary society. He explores physical presence, modes of behavior, embedded symbolism, and latent meanings that are present in and can be deduced from human groupings, social customs, and collective and political and religious patterns. Kamwathi's work has been exhibited in numerous venues around the world, and he was part of the Kenya Pavilion at the 57th edition of the Venice Biennial in 2017. He has also participated in the Young Conco Biennial in Kinshasa in 2019 and the 8th edition of the Ake Arts and Book Festival in Lagos in 2020. His work is part of collections of Safaricom, the British Museum, the Bates College of Art and Museum, East African Visual Arts Trust, the World Bank headquarters, among others. Our sign language interpreter for this evening is going to be Philip Omondi. As we go into the conversation, I would like to request that as you join the chat, please remember to mute yourself. Thank you very much for your attention and for your cooperation. We will have a Q&A after our speakers are done, so I will kindly request that if you do have any questions, please type them in the tab and the moderator will address them during the Q&A. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to ask your question directly. Would like to make programs as accessible and inclusive as possible, and so we will have a sign language interpreter throughout the conversation. The name of the sign language interpreter is available. I am now going to hand over to Peter Kamwathi to take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don, and thank you to the panelists and all who are tuned into this stream. I think for me, it's a beautiful thing to kind of have this moment to kind of listen in to two very profound artists. One of the things, and this is taking notes from kind of the ongoing exhibition, the idea of breaking bread. Is kind of looking at the diversity of mediums, but then also seeing that in as much as we have this spectrum of mark making and really the application of media, that at the core of it all are these extremely fundamental human issues being addressed. So one of the things that I also noted, between Priscilla's and of course Beatrice's work, is that the approach in terms of material and medium is completely different. But then there is that convergence to at the point where the human body is concerned, and also the idea of looking at the human body as a terrain, that potentially embodies so much complexity. So I wanted to kind of, to start this conversation, kind of just a, query, kind of asking the artists to take us through the two works in the exhibition. I think for Priscilla, you have Blue Blood and I think Waving Time again, because there's a connection between process also there. And of course, Beatrice's work, The Substance of Things, as we try, kind of to get, into the substance of the works themselves. Yeah, please. We can start with Priscilla.
Okay, thank you so much for your kind introduction. Really appreciate, and I'm honored to be part of this conversation and to be in dialogue with all you brilliant people. Yes, and without much ado, I'll just take you through what I've been up to as a person, as an artist, that is really tied to my thinking. And then we can open up Blue Blood. Everything I've been navigating through as a person and as an artist is solely tied to the body as an idea. And I really find it interesting to exist within that same premises of something that I am inquiring about and exploring. It is more of like I'm fascinated and repelled by it at the same time, because of that strong polarities that really present itself to the body. Stemming down from that, I would say that the theme borders around my work is really heightened around the female body, archive, and alienation. And that is what brings my creative thinking together and holds it together. In that regard, I will reflect a little bit about archives and its connection to the body. Just a brief little story. My mom, anytime during childbirth, would buy a piece of cloth in commemoration of that birth. And I really found it fascinating how she would use a piece of cloth to kind of document her childbirth. And so her wardrobe became like a time capsule that housed different timelines, ranging from me and my other siblings. But then it was the mere representation of the body with a material, with an object, that really fascinated me. And then I was thinking how other things and objects and materials and things had represented me in certain instances. And so from there, I start to see the body as a repository of histories, of experiences in time, that actually allows the body to become. And so in that process of become, it heightens its fluidity, and then it becomes this kind of like a surface where history and presence exists, where desire and refusal collide, where a lot of polarities exist. And so that is how I started getting interested in working with fabrics and materials and collecting all these old historical fabrics, and seeing them as documents, as archives, as spaces where other bodies have been. And so my idea of the body actually finds various and diverse expressions in my work. It can present itself as a material. It can present itself as visually with bodily effect, and it can also be hybridized in a certain kind of way. And in that thinking, what really moves me into making some of these works, especially Blue Blood and the others, is that constant mutability attached to the body. It's like a dance within completeness. It doesn't end. It keeps changing and morphing as time goes on. Anything at all can represent the body based on attachment. And so from there, I'm really now influenced by the kind of materials that I'm even working with, how it's reflecting the kind of thinking I'm having with the body. And so blue blood actually draws its title from the literal biological trait of the octopus, considering its copper-based blue color blood. And the octopus is really central to my thinking of the body. It houses really this interesting artificial kind of intelligence that scientists are borrowing from. And considering the kind of era we are in, being on the cybernetic landscape and all that, I feel like technology becomes a prosthetic that is automatically part of the body. And it's actually an adaptive extension, but it can also present itself in a different type of way. And so I play with the octopus as a metaphor and as a muse, part limb, part sensor, that actually opens up the body's capacity to be like a soft machine made of memory and fluid intelligence. And then in there, explore what it means, not just exploration, I also fantasize what it means to be human using technology as a prosthetic that actually enhances our human senses and intellectual experience. But the octopus, and in my narrative, very centered on blue blood, it's not just benign. It also presents itself as a kind of an unsettling invasion, like I had mentioned earlier. Because as I think about the body, I think about all the polarities that could exist under the skin when it comes to diseases and trauma. It is not a safe space. It's a place of desire and refusal at the same time. And so these are the two narratives that the octopus begins to play metaphorically in my thinking. It can be rapturous, invasive, just like mutations that are birthed from diseases. And so the body becomes a place of like hope and horror at the same time. The octopus exhibits itself as kind of like a prosthetic and also not just only a prosthetic, but an intruder at the same time, looking at diseases and sicknesses and how it morphs the body. So yeah, metaphorically, it just opens up a dialogue about what is happening beneath the skin and how that can be addressed through material and through my profound interest in the octopus as a very fluid and intelligent organism. Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting because I think one of the things I noted in blue blood was there's an extension to the limbs where one of the limbs looks like the tentacles, and I think it has this sequence. I think and also just taking it to Beatrice. So the body has terrain, but then also the idea of looking at the body beyond the surface of the skin. Yeah.
For me, the human form or our bodies are very profound in that we are finite, but we move through life with this sense of like we're immortal. And so sometimes when you kind of find yourself in situations where you're challenged by your own immortality, it can be of close members, the idea of how disease kind of takes a toll on the body. For me, I think my early work especially, and the reason why I think I paint in the way I paint, where the forms feel like they are moving through the canvas, and are not restrained, because I feel like if you observe most of my paintings, they do not I do not fit the entire form into the canvas, but rather create them in such a way that it feels like it moves and has a life beyond the frame of the canvas. Because at the same time, when I say that we are finite, we also kind of like, you feel like in this shell that feels limited, in as much as your mind can go and think beyond ways that actually are restricted by the form. So whenever I'm looking at issues, and for me, like Priscilla, I'll go back to how I look and think of the form, and in the sense of how finite we are. Mine will kind of like come back to when my mother passed away. And I came to myself in a way, in the understanding that we are not always going to be here forever. So when you think about how that challenges how you think and how you kind of move forward, I feel like you kind of start realizing the shell in which you live in is very limited. It's limited by disease, it's limited by age. And so from that point on, I create works that kind of like look and are supposed to be a mirror that reflects our journey as human beings. And so the stories I tell are like of identity, the female identity, and how I navigate in the world, in the contemporary world, in my community, in a very patriarchal society, and also in a global society where it feels like the woman agenda is kind of like a very, I'll say polarized issue. So I think when I'm creating work, I have all these different themes running in my mind, but I have to also narrow it down to kind of like be something that is understandable to the person who's going to look at the work. Because at the end of the day, sometimes you can have very big themes running in your mind, but you also have to make them more articulate and in a manner that in which the public might receive it. And what I've understood from painting in that way, most people who will engage with my work find themselves either really kind of like, either they will love the work. It doesn't have a gray area about it. It's either people love the paintings or they don't, and they don't understand the reason why they don't like them. I've had people talk about the work being dark, and that's the most interesting thing because for me, I feel like I've already kind of excavated myself and the issues that I'm kind of like trying to relay in a manner that has allowed me to be more human and in more understanding in the body that I occupy, that when I present the work, and the reason why also I kind of like create works that have no resemblance to anybody, the works themselves are stripped of any markers and identifiers of skin, because I want to remove the politics of that and the dialogues that come with that, that allow people to kind of like inform issues on work based on like, when if they look at the painting and they think, oh, that's a black body, and automatically you're put in a box and the conversation changes. But rather when I strip the forms and and what is the identifier, then it allows you to really kind of dig into like the issues that we're trying to kind of like talk about. And at the end of the day, at the basis of my work, what I'm just trying to do is express humanity. Because for me, by creating my work, I'm not only trying to understand myself, but I'm also trying to understand my fellow human beings. So that basically is like how I would sum up how I kind of like approach my work. Yeah.
And just to on that, the substance of things, and I think when you mentioned the idea of loss, and engaging with extremely deep cutting difficult issues, what came to mind was, I think, your immortality series, and I know there's a point whereby you went beyond working with paint, and also incorporated other material into the work itself. And in saying that, also linking into Priscilla's work, it's also the idea of having this multi-layer in terms of material. So you have the traditional textiles, and of course your interventions. And I think I had in one of the interviews, you're talking about how that your process is surgical in a sense, because you cut, you dissect, and then of course you reassemble. And Beatrice, also, if you could just touch a bit on of the idea that in kind of these layers of medium and material that make this connection to handling difficult. So I think maybe you could touch on it. I won't highlight what the actual material was. You can mention that.
Okay. Like for example, the Immortality series, it came from, you know how you have routines that surround death. Like you have the wake, you have people coming in, going out, coming in and going out. And then you have almost like this kind of cyclical kind of process of how we process things. So you have people who come in remembrance of the departed, but once they go, you're left in this space where you have everything that the departed owned. So for me, when I created for me, the Immortality series actually was for me trying to kind of come to terms with the grief And so what I did is that I incorporated X-rays, things that were part of the process of, like, like when she went to the hospital and, like the X-rays, the MRIs. So when I created these works, they felt almost like they're not even collage, they were more of assemblage. So it's like you're taking the X-rays and kind of introducing them to the paintings. So you have paintings that have like almost like three-dimensional kind of aspects to them. When it came to photographs, these are photographs of people who have been in the family album, for example. Some of them I know, some of them I don't know. They're dated back to when my parents maybe were younger. And so you have like all these films. And so for me, when I introduced these elements into the work, it was kind of like giving new life to something that already existed, that already had a story of its own. But now when it's placed in the context of a painting, it kind of like had a different narrative, because then what you're doing is that you're setting people in time, people who lived in time, and it becomes a whole different conversations. And so the work, beyond being just a photograph that was taken and dated at a particular time, when I incorporated it in the painting, it had a different meaning. And I love that continuity, because for me, it is the idea of how we try to live on in the memories of those we leave behind. The reason why the departed continue to linger in us, and that someone said that someone is actually dead when you no longer remember them. So when you have all this evidence of their existence, you have the photographs and all that, and you can incorporate them in their work, they very much are present. Even, that's why I think we talk about our ancestors in a way, because these are stories that carry on from people who maybe I did not even know, but who are stories that have been relayed to me through my parent. And so in that way, life, it's like we kind of like maintain our immortality in as much as we are finite beings. So for me, that whole process of the immortality series was kind of like trying to show how we linger on in the memories of those we leave behind. So I used to kind of incorporate old memorabilia, old letters that my parents kind of like communicated with each other. And so these are letters that had meaning to these two people, but when you kind of like introduce them in a particular work and in the context of the work, it has a different and a new meaning. And so for me, in that way, I feel like the story of their lives continued even long after they're gone. So it's the idea of how I was saying before, like we are so finite, but we want to kind of latch onto life, and we latch onto life by kind of leaving these different footprints with us behind.
Priscilla, just so the idea, I think one of the things you've spoken about previously is the idea of ghost weavers. But then there's a phrase you make, and this is also connecting, maybe could also walk us into that. The idea that, and I'll quote, that textiles encapsulate, and this is paraphrasing, time and memory.
Yeah.
And then you build on that.
Yeah. So in that regard, I would reflect again on how my mom would use code speaking in culture to document her motherhood, to literally find a way of representing different timelines using fabrics. And that in itself, I felt like was a really interesting way of attaching, just like Beatrice said, a finite body to a certain object that does not have the ability to die. And so the body begins to pass on and sustain a certain kind of different body and speak a different language that is more codified. And so when I started to collect these old historical fabrics, I would be in conversation with these fabric sellers, and they would say, oh, Queen Mothers came here to exchange these fabrics for newer ones. They want to stay updated. And in that thinking, I'm just looking at the body, also finding other expressions through an update, just like an interface to find an update. And so I collect these old ones. And for me, I feel like some of them have been just handed down from generations to generations. And they have specific sizes for women. So those are the particular ones that I collect. And for me, it's like spaces where other women have been, where other familiar bodies have been. And that brings me to why the female body becomes a really dominant motive in my work. I feel like my understanding of the body also begins from a very intimate perspective, where the female body becomes something that I essentially relate with. So it is easy to speak a language that you are familiar with. The female body becomes like my point of departure into this narrative. And that's the reason why I would go for female-sized fabrics. And so these fabrics are actually old clothes that have been woven, passed from a feminine generation to another generation. And so I see them as one document, as archives of people's lives that have passed on. And so it holds memories of people and allows them to relive in a certain different kind of way. And so that collaboration I find really interesting with the ghost weavers, because some of these fabrics have existed for long. And so it's like picking an old object and still continue a certain narrative that had kind of had a pause and continue again with a certain present body and attaching a certain nowness or newness or presence to it. Yeah, that is what I would call a collaboration with ghost weavers.
No, thank you. It's also interesting because when Selom did the curator's walkthrough, I think he kind of highlighted kind of what the different lines. I'm fascinated by maps, and so I'm always looking at what lines on maps kind of mean. But then I think there's also a point in, and also I'll probably also pass it on to Beatrice and then move it towards you, is that within the frame of your works, the works that I've been looking at, the line kind of tends to exist on the surface of the body, and I'll also kind of also even throw in that also the body tends to be foreshortened. In Beatrice's work, I think in the recent works now, you rarely have anything beyond the neck. Basically, it's just a torso. And I think in your work, Priscilla, I noted also kind of the idea of foreshortening. There are situations where you have, a multiplicity of limbs, for example. And I can't make, whether you have the same form kind of having mutated, and you're speaking about fluidity. But then touching on the line is your embroidery, I think, around the margins of the velvet of the human forms, and even transversing the terrain of the female body. And then, of course, Beatrice, also within that also you have, the application of pastels and colored pencils, kind of being really on the surface of this layer of paint. What does the line what role does it play, kind of in service, in expanding, and I think you spoke of expansion, my perception and our understanding of the issues, that you're unpacking.
So, like I said earlier, that my thinking and understanding of the body comes from first of all, an intimate perspective where I actually reflect personally. And so the lines that interrupt the narratives in the body of work are actually routes that I have worked on and documented on the ways up. And this has been a way of weaving myself into the story in another way. So I document my movements as a body experiencing things in life. And most of the movements that I do, I would document them on the ways up and have them later projected on my works. So that actually started from a very not so good experience. My not so well mother at the moment had experienced multiple seizures a couple of time ago, and we had rushed her to the hospital. She had experienced some absences and had not got the ability to even recognize some of us. That was one of my breaking points of looking at the body from a very different perspective. That ability to actually not be in control at a certain point. And so in my thinking of it, we became so attached to a particular route, moving from my studio on campus to the hospital almost all the time. And anytime I would use my Uber app, that particular route would pop up. It continued to pop up so much that it would keep reminding me of that particular day. And so that route was almost inherent. It had become a part of my memory. And then I started to now bring some of these routes into my thinking because it was like a documentation of my body. The route at a point had become a representation of me because I'm moving on that route to go and see my not so doing well mother and come back home as a body moving in one direction back and forth. So the route is also a certain intervention of capturing memory and putting experiences together in just a single line. And some of these experiences are actually interruptions that puts the body in a certain dis-ease. And so they become very important to my image construction. And so these routes are actually routes that I would take an Uber on. Some of them are actually direct stitches. I don't know if you'd see that closely. Direct stitched routes are routes that I would walk on. So I was so delicate with that. I wanted to know the routes that I would pick a car and the routes that I would walk on to make some of these memory tangible and visible to keep in my work. So basically that's the route. That's what the routes and the vivid lines in my work is about. They are my movements and my personal documentations in the work.
Thank you. Beatrice?
That is very interesting, Priscilla. For me, I feel that sometimes life moves in such a way that we barely notice it. Like we are in this kind of machine of like we have routines so that you don't really stop and be present. And so for me, the idea of kind of like drawing after I've painted is kind of like tying myself in space, and kind of like connecting me in time and in that moment. Because when you look at my work, the forms are almost like in and out of space. Like they feel like they are bleeding into the background, but they're also very present. So for me, sometimes when I draw the line, it's like I'm trying to kind of like cement myself in the work, and also to kind of like have this idea of connection, like ties that bind. So for me, especially when I'm working on something, the idea of drawing kind of ties me to the story that I'm telling, because I'm not just telling a story out of the blue. I'm actually telling a human story. I'm trying to kind of express my experiences, but also kind of remove myself. And I think when I paint, that's the whole idea. When I paint and the forms are in, they feel like they're in and out of the surface, is because also you feel that we feel sometimes that we live life, or rather life is happening to us, but then you kind of like interact with people and you realize you're all having the same human experience. So for me, the line then becomes this connection that kind of like ties me in time and in place of the matter and the issue that I'm actually tackling in the work. So you'll find like in most of my paintings, I rarely kind of like find myself finishing a painting, and I always find myself reaching for a pastel and kind of like drawing. It's like I'm trying to make sure the form stays in place in as much as the form feels like it kind of like feels like it's in and it's also out. Because I've also heard people say that my work is abstract, and maybe it is, but interestingly enough, my paintings actually do start with a human figure. I start with form, but I think sometimes when you paint, sometimes the idea or the narrative that you're trying to kind of like portray kind of like then takes precedence, and so it becomes the idea that you're trying to tell. And so sometimes when I look at the work, I can find like that sometimes the form has completely changed. It feels abstracted in a way, but it's very, very present because you can still see the outline of it. And so for me, I think also in a very kind of unconscious way, my drawing is kind of like trying to put it in place, like you're present. It's like trying to be present within the context of the work, in as much as the narrative is about you and also about the human story that you're actually trying to kind of like express. Yeah.
You just mentioned connections, the idea that, kind of lines, being in a way agents, can perceive, as enabling connections. So I think and this was, I think when this came up, I wondered what is a journey, or what journey do, both of you kind of had to undertake as you try to grapple and unpack and even work towards kind of unpacking issues that are, there's, like I think one of the words I used earlier was the idea of kind of deep-seated, deep cutting. And there's a point earlier I thought I should have asked you, how does your day start in the studio? What's when you enter your space, what happens in a nutshell? So.
One thing I've actually kind of made a point of doing, because we're living in a very technical, we are very, in a very I would say technical online computer age. I make it a point to not take my phone until maybe around 1 p.m. So if you call me between like in the morning and I don't take your call, that's the reason, because I don't want it to interrupt the rhythm. And sometimes for me, the studio sometimes is not even just that I'm in the studio and I'm working. Sometimes it's just a place where I'm reading, I'm thinking, and kind of like easing into the day. And I've realized that actually helps, because sometimes when you have the distraction of maybe the phone, for example, it kind of like throws your day and you find yourself kind of like there's this kind of like endless scrolling and it eats into your time. So for me, I love the ritual of kind of like just easing into the day. I can be in the studio just looking at a work that I'm currently working on, and I'm just seated. I'm not. For me, when I'm in the studio, the first thing is not to kind of reach and take a brush and paint. For me, it's more like sit and be very present, and not be very hurried, because you want to kind of like also be present in your thoughts and in what it is that exactly that you're doing, because I feel that art in itself, as an artist, I think 80% of my work is more research and 20% is the execution, because that is just muscle memory. But I think when you come to the idea that you're trying to kind of like excavate and kind of like see whether it has longevity, you kind of like want to make sure that your research is it stemmed into your own experiences. And most of the time, I have to be honest that most of my work kind of like start with me. It could be something that I've experienced in my interactions, in my immediate interactions in community, and then which actually then prompts me to want to think about a particular issue. And then when I think about a particular issue, then I start researching, and then only to realize that it's not an issue that is only limited to yourself. It's like a very human issue. And then now the idea behind that is also to kind of like be able to kind of like have a way in which you kind of think of the idea, execute the idea, but also kind of remove yourself from it, because you're not just telling your story. I feel that in as much as all art is autobiographical, it also kind of like has to connect to your audience. And so you cannot, I feel for me personally, this is debatable. I think people kind of create from different kind of like mindsets, but I feel I can only create from what I'm living. I feel like if I create from observation and it's not something that I've experienced, then I feel like for some reason I feel like to me the work never feels as genuine. But when I'm talking about like the issues of femicide, it's because these things kind of like are aligned to who I am as a person, and especially a woman, and also living in the society that you're living in. Then you kind of like start kind of like extrapolating all these ideas that kind of look into that issue, and then you start realizing it's not just a community issue, it's not just also a social issue, it's not just it's a cultural issue, it's also a global issue. So sometimes you can find yourself looking at themes that go beyond the scope of your initial idea, and so sometimes you have to actually step away, so that you can be able to kind of like look at it in an independent way without judgment, but also with care. Because sometimes the issues that we kind of like paint or draw or talk about are very sensitive, because they come from a system that is already in place, that has a particular way of thinking. And so sometimes when you kind of like you sound like you are challenging a system, so you become the outlier rather than kind of. So for me, I want the paintings to kind of like allow you to kind of think through. I'm not here to judge or to kind of like impose something on you, but to allow you to kind of like think differently. And sometimes, so for me, I find like recently my practice has been, I feel like there's a sense of care. It's not just about kind of like executing and creating work, but there's also, I feel like I'm very present. I'm very intentional on the work I'm creating, because I feel like we're living in a world where it feels almost very violent, very loud. And so sometimes I feel in the presence of that, you feel you're always in a kind of like in a very heightened sense of anxiety. Case in point, I think in 2020 when we had the corona outbreak, and for me, as artists, I feel like we are always in isolation. We create in isolations. We are living in our studios, and we have all this way. We are kind of like isolated in our practice, and then we kind of come out of that shell and present work that you've been creating for some time. In as much as you have like different times where you kind of interact with society. But our practice in itself it's almost very private. So you have this kind of almost like bubble and insulation into how you create. And so for me, when I say like I started kind of like having a mind shift, especially during COVID, is because when the world shut down, everybody was home, whereas my studio is at home. And so for me, it was the norm. Like, so for me, when people felt that shift in kind of having their time and the freedom of movement taken away, for me, it felt it was very normal. And I was wondering why people had this sense of like you want to just be outside. And so for me, when I say like my work has now kind of a sense of care when I think about it, because we are so rushed as human beings, and we are constantly rushing to do something that we never want to sit still in ourselves and kind of experience the moment. And that may be because maybe the environments that we're living in, the times we're living in, it could be economical, it could be many things. But sitting still with yourself and just enjoying the space in which you occupy, a lot of people don't know how to do that. And so for me, when I said that, no, I approach my work with case, because the stories I'm telling, I want them to relate, to not be just stories that feel almost abstract and out there, but it's actually what we're actually living. And so for me, when I present the work, I want the people to kind of feel, when they look at the work, they feel themselves mirrored back. So for me, I think that's the kind of like routine I have in the morning, a very quiet one that eases into the day. I can be in the studio, and then maybe when I take a break and then come and make a cup of coffee, that's when I actually now start kind of like doing something that is actually physical, but it could be a very but it depends. Sometimes it's like when you have an idea, it can be also I'm in the studio and I cannot wait for the day to break. I'm already in the studio. Like it's never one thing. It just depends with how the day kind of breaks. Priscilla?
Yeah, thank you, Beatrice. Yeah. Also for me, I would say that normal day in my studio is very relaxed, and then also I am very much inquisitive, and so I am guilty of doom scrolling on the internet usually. But I feel like it has been a really interesting way of also staying connected. I mean, there are multiple sides to understanding a certain era or generation. Our presence on these cybernetic landscapes actually allows us to feed from multiple sources. And so I think it's as much as it may not be an advantage, it also has certain prospects that we can tap from. So in a usual day, I would also find things around, maybe other interesting videos to make me laugh, to brighten up my day. But I also read a lot, from novels to the Bible. I listen to music, and most of these sources actually fit into my thinking. They are really interesting ways of expressing oneself. So I consider other artists, whether they are musicians, they are cinematographers, they are writers and all that. Aside working in my studio, these are some of the things that you would find me doing. And I learned from all these multiple sources from cinematography. It helps me to maybe build angles when it comes to drawings. Reading novels, I'm able to understand other people's way of thinking about the body and other things. even from the Bible, which is a very coded book, you are able to understand how to read, how to build language, how to find certain metaphors that can represent a particular thing you are thinking about. Reading a certain passage and looking for the Hebrew understanding of a certain word. I feel like it's a really interesting way of like nibbling and picking from multiple sources. So my studio is, being in the studio is it's not like very chaotic, it's fun. I don't pigeonhole myself into one direction as to making of works, but I reflect on other artists, musicians. I look at how people title their albums. I watch movies. I'm looking at angles and all that. So I really do have fun in my studio. It's not just a place where I just produce work. It's a place where I get to know how other people are also producing work, to understanding their perspectives and also how they also think. And in that way, it contributes to what I also be doing. Yeah, anyway, thank you.
Thank you. And this is just a perspective. That's yeah. I know as in the making of your works, you do, of course, reference, events that have occurred. But then, how is the future embedded in your works? I mean, what are the possibilities for the future? Beyond just, kind of referencing, archiving. Yeah. And so we'll start with Priscilla.
Okay, so with regards to the future, I feel like I am as fluid as the octopus that I think about. And there are so many things emerging with regards to technology and the experience of it that I think I could explore. I feel like it is really important that as an artist or of any particular field, you are able to sync with the spirit of a particular era. And so for the future, I'm looking forward to other collaborations that would connect or open up my work in other possibilities of being engaged with. And if I am looking at the octopus as a prosthetic or a connection of technology that is attached to the body, my expressions are more tactile and I come from a very different angle. So I could also explore the possibilities of actually vividly working with some of these interventions and see how it could occur. Now in the work, I actually work with fabrics that actually contain that word fluidity or that profound mutability of the body. And it plays that role for me as at now. Looking at the sequence fabric, it has this sensor effect to it. When you touch it, it's able to change color. So the work does not even stay the same. It will not be the same as where it is at Nkai. And when it comes back to Ghana, it's going to change. And so I feel like that sense of even not being static and evolving is already embedded, but it can also be explored and improved in other ways technologically. So yeah, I'm open to future collaborations that are interesting and reflective of this era. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think when you mentioned the octopus, talked about that, the idea of adaptability. Yeah, and also Beatrice, in a nutshell, also, what are the desired realities, beyond?
I find that what I have is like almost iterations, like my work organically transitions into something, and sometimes you can have maybe a motif of the previous work kind of like coming into a new body of work. But for me, because my work is very much rooted in our lived experience, so for me, what does the future hold? I'm also kind of like looking at how information is relayed and how the reason why, especially the painting itself that is in the exhibition, and it's called the sum of things, is that I've realized that we are very caught up in the kind of like the hamster wheel of information, and most of the time the information is not always good news, and I feel like it almost makes you wonder, is it like strategic for you to kind of like when you're online, outside of like if your algorithm kind of like brings you like very healthy and kind of funny and kind of well-grounded content, or are you kind of like, like doom scrolling is and we're living in a time where it feels like we are at the cusp of something major happening, and it's not just locally, it's also global. You have the wars, you have whatever is happening here in our country and what is happening within the continent, and then you have what is happening in the Americas and in Europe. Like it almost feels like we're in the cusp of something major happening. And so sometimes I think as artists, because our role is to kind of document and to kind of tell stories, I think sometimes it's also good to kind of like not separate yourself, but be able to be present within your community and your more intimate kind of surroundings. Because when you think of these issues in a very kind of like global context, they become ambiguous and they become this thing that you cannot be able to pin down, and you're overwhelmed by the anxiety of it all. So for me, that painting for me especially was about how this idea that we're kind of like taken in with so many concerns at the same time. And so far, most of the time, your nervous system seems to always be, it's like you're trying to catch your breath because you don't know what else is going to happen. So for me, it's like being able to kind of like tell what is true and what are lies, but also kind of look within your community and where you're living in. Because at the end of the day, in as much as we create work and that has maybe a global audience, it all starts communally with your surroundings and the people that you interact with on a day-to-day. And I think also sometimes I do reflect on the fact that in as much as technology has kind of connected the world, it's also kind of like alienated everybody, because we have this sense of like we are connected, but there's such a almost like such the statistics now show how there's a large kind of demographic of people who are committing suicide. And you're like, if we're disconnected, why is someone committing? Like the connection is lost because we're under the assumption, because we can talk online and we can see each other online, but we're not connected communally. You're not likely to know what your friend is doing communally, because we are very in the culture of sending memes. Like if I send you a meme, that's my way of connecting. Like if I send you a meme and you laugh, in that way you feel my assumption is that I've made contact, I've connected with you. But I feel that sometimes when I step out the door, if I go and have a coffee with a friend, and you catch up on the day and what is going on in their lives, those small things, they compound in the long run. So why you don't feel as isolated or as alone. And for me, that's where I think my work kind of like looks at the idea of humanity, because then when you're breaking bread and you're sharing your lives, then you start realizing like you're all kind of like grappling with the same things, and you're able to kind of like help each other. It can be the help of the listening ear. It can be the help of like, it can be something that you're able to kind of like physically do to help somebody in their situation. So in as much as, so in the future, I wish people would kind of come back to that sense of like the communal sense, like, because I feel like we've made it not feel so organic as it was before, like you could know what your neighbor, or you could run into your neighbor. Nowadays, you have to call before you show up. Like these things kind of change, and it's good. Change is always good, but sometimes you have to ask yourself, how is a change affecting you and your environment? Because at the end of the day, when you think about, we are the one species that is, we are very kind of like, we are social beings, we are communal beings. So sometimes those are the things that I'm thinking about as when I was saying that when I create work now, I have the sense of care, the sense of not just for me to kind of like just create work, but also to understand the manner in which I create the work. I'm looking to kind of like understand myself, and by understanding myself, I'm able to understand the person who is going to engage with the work. because like we usually say like I can stand and say I'm a good person, but that is neither here nor there because nobody ever thinks of themselves maybe as a bad person, but my character is actually only revealed in my interaction with somebody else. Like, so we are human beings who cannot live in vacuums. So for me, in the way I think about how I'm creating here on is that kind of has been very much in my mind, the idea of kind of community and being to reach inward, but also to reach outward in a way. I don't know whether that makes any sense.
No, I think it does. I think we thank you for the also the idea of I think breaking bread has to do with community. I would say, and this is to everyone who's linked logged onto this webinar. We are opening the space up for questions, and I think you can do that on the question and answer tab. And now basically to Beatrice and Priscilla, I think one of the responses has been posted is, I think you can see that, have you found any companions in nature that have stayed with you as you think about and make your work? Because you speak, about, Beatrice referencing technology, and of course, Priscilla also making that linkage, with the octopus and adaptability and technology. The point actually kept thinking of AI when you're talking about explaining how flexible the octopus is. Yes, so to both of you, we can start with Priscilla. As we also as the participant also post their questions.
Yeah, I think in that regard, one thing that is really constant with the body is its fluidity. And the body, I feel like, is so much tied to time that in that regard, I don't know, I don't want to say you cannot untie yourself, but every era has a certain spirit that latches up onto the body. And so the body actually adapts. Maybe before we had been in existence, there were no use of these laptops to have webinars like this. But then through technology, some of these things come up and the body finds a way to adapt. And in that regard, using the octopus again as a metaphor is looking at the body's attachment to time and that fluid ability to transform. I mentioned that it is a repository of experiences that allows the body to become. So the body is constantly becoming. And I feel like in that state of becoming, it's able to now find new modes and new ways of expressions that allows it to be new, that allows it to reflect to a certain age. But I can understand Beatrice's perspective and also how she would see technology and the advancement of it and how it actually do not maybe bring people together. But I just feel like I cannot help how the spirit of a particular era contributes to a thinking of an artist. And I feel like contemporary art actually latches on that. It looks for newness and growth and advancement and the ability to adapt. As much as we are thinking about it, but we also think about what we are doing and how we can reflect that in a certain era. Yes, basically, that is what I have to say about that. Yeah, but in that regard, I remember mentioning that the octopus becomes like an adaptive extension, but also it becomes like an intruder. And so we, just like the body and what lies beneath, there are very strong polarities that are in existence that cannot be avoided. And so being that prosthetic and an intruder at the same time is something that cannot be helped. The body can be very healthy and be sick the next moment, and that cannot be helped. So I feel like in all instances, the body is trying to find a new language, just like artists, we always find also new languages to evolve, to adapt, and to settle in ages and eras, in spirits. Yeah. Thank you.
I just wanted to best extend to you also have part of your studio process that you have collaborators. How do you navigate the space of really, yeah.
Sorry. That is actually a really important part of pre-production for me, because I get the opportunity to question other bodies, other people, how they think about the existence as bodies in the now or even outside of space. And so these collaborators, people would call them models, but they're actually fused into my narrative of understanding the body. And so I have this kind of interrogations with them prior to the shoot. And I ask them questions like, maybe if you are not a human and you existing outside your humanness as something else, how would you exhibit that? How would you kind of twist your body to conform to that kind of narrative in the mind? And so these collaborators they give off really interesting postures, and I would ask them and they're like, oh, I'm trying to mimic an octopus, I'm trying to mimic a lizard if I wasn't myself and I was this. So that is actually a certain performance that happens behind the work itself before it even comes to fruition. And from there, these collected images comes to the studio as projections that are drawn and later cut out. This is where the surgical collaging comes in. Now I come to the studio and dismantle these bodies and put them back together, mainly because one of the theme borders that is really backing my thinking is alienation and the body existing outside itself. And so I cut these bodies and put them back together again, because already the body houses a certain sense of comfort and strangeness. And so it pulls you into the work when you are almost finding a leg and then suddenly there's an octopus. It seduces into kind of the sense of familiarity with the body parts that you are familiar with. And then it pulls you back again with a tentacle of an octopus. And that which is really deliberate, a part of my making in the studio. Yeah.
And I think I'll just, so I have two questions. One of them I wasn't sure whether I'll ask, but I'll start by saying, Beatrice, I think one of the things that I think I keep seeing, and this is more, in social media, is that your forays into nature, seem to also be part of your process. I mean, is this something you can kind of just, yeah.
I would not call myself an avid hiker, but I love hiking. But I also love how I don't know whether it's my nature in particular that I feel very centered when I'm in nature. There's something very kind of like balancing being in a trail in the middle of trees, and there's no noise. And to kind of like almost before I explain this, to kind of like add on to what Priscilla was talking about, I really don't mind technology. I feel like it's a fantastic tool, but I feel like it's kind of like taken away so much of like that sense of stillness. So for me, I use it a lot, especially when it comes to research and stuff like that. But I find myself often enough just going into a trail and you're just surrounded by trees and it's quiet and it's just you and the silence. Because sometimes I feel like the world is so loud that you need kind of like recenter yourself. And so for me, I absolutely love being outdoors. I choose to be outdoors anytime, because for me, I feel like there's also something that happens when you're in nature that kind of like reshifts your entire body. I even think maybe doctors would say like take a walk, like it actually, like we have this phrase that when you're angry, take a walk, because it actually does wonders. By the time you're done walking, you'll find like your stress and the anger kind of dissipates. So for me, that's why one of the reasons why I love kind of being outdoors or walking all the time is because I find it also allows me to kind of like quiet the mind and kind of like if I'm thinking about, or if I have an idea that I'm thinking about, it becomes more clear. If I want to kind of like see my way through a problem, especially when I'm creating, I prefer to be outdoors, like in nature, and it's quiet, and I don't have the disruptions of having like noise. I'm actually present, which means that I have actually chosen to remove any distraction and just be present. And so by the time I'm exiting a trail, like I feel like there's more clarity in the way that I'm thinking, that by the time I come back into the studio, I even feel it in the work. Because sometimes as artists, I feel that when we are creating, we kind of like hit a hurdle where you feel like something is in your mind, you have the idea, but it's not coming across in the manner that you want. And so there's that frustration of like, I don't know whether it's a conscious way of trying to control the way the work kind of like appears, but I feel that sometimes most of my work feels like I allow the unconscious mind to kind of take over, because then I'm able to look back and I'm like, how did that come up? Like, but when I'm actually physically like trying to analyze everything I'm doing, half the time I find myself very frustrated, because we tend to kind of overthink rather than just execute the idea that you have and just allow it to kind of like flow from you. And for me, once that image is out and onto the canvas, there's almost like this kind of like transference of like, you feel like this, I cannot redo the painting again. No matter how many times I try to replicate it, even if the colors are the same on the palette, if I said I wanted to kind of like redo the painting, it would never, because I think there's something in us that once you kind of pour out, once it's out, it's out. So for me, I find being in nature allows me to kind of like center myself, remove the noise, because like we are so surrounded by so much of it, and it's not always bad, but sometimes I think sometimes the noise does not allow you to be to be still. And so for me to also kind of like answer one of the questions that was asked about like, is there, I am I am a cat mom and a dog mom, but I don't use them as metaphors in my work, but I do observe their behavior and how I relate with each species, and the mannerisms in which both species kind of like interact with me. I think there's something about having animals that kind of like allow us to kind of like, I feel like they actually bring out the best of ourselves. I was answering one of the question that was actually brought forth. Yeah, but I love being in nature, because for me, I feel like it's very centering. And we're also living in a world where everything feels almost like a concrete terrain, where technology and infrastructure and building has given way to kind of like, well, people call it concrete jungles, that people now kind of create like spaces of, like you're creating spaces where people come to be in nature. Well, nature was part of ourselves. I find that to be such a conundrum, where we are part of nature, but we kind of like destroy nature to create buildings and stuff, and then you create like almost they're not artificial, because they are systems that actually work, where people create parks, but these ones, they're not like me kind of like going for a hike and I'm completely removed from technology and everybody. I find that to be very interesting. So for me, I'm still unpacking how I interact with nature, and how, nature and me and my environment kind of like come together.
Well, thanks, Beatrice and Priscilla. There's one question, I think, by Derek Moshoki. And the question is, how can one develop a personality inside artistry, or embedded art into one's lifestyle in a thought process that art is more than just drawing or painting? How can we create ourselves using art? How can we develop an identity within art, especially in a world full of copy and paste, assuming that's conscious? Yeah, I mean, I would, both of you kind of, look at identity, in the work. But the question is, how is that embedded into one's lifestyle, in a thought process? So yeah, I'll open it up to the panelists.
I feel that, like when you go to school to learn about art, the history of art, we learn about the history of art, the history of the world, because someone recorded it. Someone painted the times. We learn about the Renaissance, the Expressionists and all that, because someone actually in time documented life. And in as much as we say that there's nothing new under the sun, I think when you create from the time that you're living in, that is documenting life. That is kind of also creating a conscious that if work is documented, and I think this is the thing that we don't do, especially here in Kenya, we don't archive or kind of like document properly, such that where you have books that are well researched and well kind of critiqued and articulated and written down about the artists that were there before us. We talk about first generation artists. I don't know what generation I am, but like I know of them because maybe someone kind of like, if I go to the museum, maybe I might be lucky enough to see a work that is part of the museum collection, or but in archiving and documenting it, that is how we preserve the time, or rather, we actually, we preserve the time, meaning long after we are gone, people are going to read about us, about our work, or even be able to have the privilege of seeing our works, maybe in museums. And in that way, we're able to kind of like document and tell about the time that we live, because I feel that in years to come, there's a generation that's going to be born that will not understand that there was a world where technology did not exist. Whereas we have a generation now that feels like they are kind of like, they're not able to grasp and how fast technology is. But there's a generation that's going to be born that will not know that there was a time the phone did not exist. It will be like you'll be walking to a museum and someone is giving like a lecture on like, these pieces were between this period and this period. So for me, that is what art does. Art kind of like, in a way, traps time. And especially if you're creating work with the idea, I don't think we create with the idea. I think for me, especially when I create, I'm telling the story of the time and my experiences. And so for me, if it's collectively done and kind of documented and written about, then someone is going to know I was looking at these issues, issues that affect women during this particular time. And are they things that have shifted in the next decade? Are they going to be the same issues that they're still tackling in the next decade? Or is it like, was there legislation that was passed that kind of like these issues became, So that's the idea of what art is. Art is supposed to kind of like allow us to kind of look and expound on the issues that we are kind of grappling with as a society, and not look at it from the idea of like male and female, or this kind of polar opposite of like where you feel like every time you bring up an issue, it feels like it's an attack on somebody. But I'm actually telling us an issue that I'm going through. I'm trying to share that human experience. And over time, what I'm trying to do is connect and see that I'm not on the attack. I'm not attacking. I'm actually trying to look for understanding. And I think for me, I hope art does that. In the idea where you were saying that documenting, I hope we document it in a way that if people look like maybe 2 decades from now, or maybe 3 decades, if we are still alive, I hope that they can be able to tell the time difference. Like, because I feel like, yes, there's going to be a time where you'll be talking about things that people are like, huh? So you have to actually go to a museum to better understand a time period. The same way we go to the museum and we read post-independence or pre-independence kind of period, and you're looking at all this kind of archived history of a nation and stuff like that. I hope the same thing happens to art, and that's the role we have as artists, to kind of like not be silent, but to be very present in whatever is happening around us, and to be able to articulate it and to document it and to paint it, to sculpt it, be it video, photography, whichever medium, but to be able to kind of tell the stories of that we were here, like after we are long gone, that someone will be able to tell that, oh, this is what was happening during this time. So for me, I actually think that a lot, especially when I'm creating like outside of the fact that your work is in walls, but also I think also with time, maybe it's not going to be relevant. You never know. Like what we hold space for, or what we think is important, a time might come and it shall be like something that is not as important. And this actually speaks to how we are in an era where people are kind of like, especially in most of the articles I'm reading, there's a lot of complaint about the AI technology and how it's kind of like taking away from an artist and kind of replicating. And so you have all these different theses and kind of historians and people kind of panelists and people kind of chipping in on how, like, in as much as it can be able to replicate a work, it doesn't have a soul. So there's something, in as much as it's able to kind of like create a work that almost feels perfect, it doesn't have the essence of your humanity in it that actually, that connects, so who knows? Priscilla?
Yeah, thanks, Beatrice. I think from the question, one of the highlights was how arts could be embedded in our lives. And I feel like that is already in existence. Things are already in existence. It only needs to find expression. And I believe that art has always existed as a form of resistance, memory tapping, truth telling, and maybe sharing deeply rooted resonances with others. And so, as artists, or even as people, we now begin to find voices for some of these experiences that happen in life. And so, I feel like people are already artists without even knowing they are. Your way of experiencing life is already an art in itself. But when it begins to find expression through a medium, it begins to come to life. And so that is what one of the beauties of being an artist, being able to find expressions for some of these experiences and bringing them to life. It also actually, I feel like, opens up a really nice way of seeing. I think that was Beatrice's title for the working conversation. The substance of things. So through that, I feel like we are able to perceive the substance of things and even nothings, and we are able to now find expressions within these things to make very important thought processes about life and things that happens in society. With regards to the technology aspect of it, I feel like every art in its creative process brings to it a certain sense of proximity the moment the artist's hand is found in the work. And as much as I reflect on technology as a prosthetic that is solely or coupled with the body, I find a way in the work to bring myself back to proximity to it through direct beading and direct hand stitches, such that even in the context of the work, as I reflect so much on technology and its connections to the body, I still find a way to bring a certain sense of intimacy through the production of the work through processes. And so in that regard, almost every part of the making of my works is really thought about. It may not be a part of an artist statement or directly put out there, but I feel like some of these little behind the scenes contribute to my thinking about the body with regards to technology, and also bringing it back into intimacy and proximity with itself. So these are some of the little, I would call it, rituals that happens in the studio that brings me back into myself. The fact that I would have to pick a little bead, pick a thread in the needle, and put all my attention into stitching and making something out of it is a way of me as an artist bringing myself in close proximity with myself. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're almost winding up, coming to the end of the session. I think also one of the takeaways, and this is from both your, there's one more question. We'll actually just respond to one more question, and we'll hand over to Don. But then for me, one of the takeaways has been the process of questioning from what is relatable and I think that, the idea that you spoke about the body as being, the female body being that is familiar. And also even for Beatrice's case, it's kind of looking at, what is relatable. And so I think also even touching on Derek's question, it's the idea that I think our identities and our personalities really come before the work is done. So the process of making the mechanics of expressing these thoughts, ideas, and feelings are basically in service to the person to so it comes way before. But so the question, and this is from Amboi Kamiru, is the question is, do market pressures influence how you make work? And this one, because of in the interest of time, let's keep it a bit brief, and then we'll hand over to Dawn. But it's also been a great just picking up the different dynamics to your processes. Also touching on self-care too. So I'm handing over with the last question: is, do market pressures influence how you make work? And this is a question from Wamboi Kamiru.
Yeah, so briefly, since we are in a rush, for me, market pressures do not influence how I make work. My studio process is very meticulous. It is layered with moving from a tambour trestle, making direct beadings, direct stitches, and that is time. That is a lot of time, and so I feel like there is no amount of pressure that can hurry that kind of a process, because it is thought-provoking, it is layered in time and in memory and in experiences, and such that the density of it cannot be compressed and rushed through. So market pressures does not really, it has nothing on me. Thank you.
No. The market does not dictate. Not at all. Not at all. In fact, I feel like for me, it it's almost like the last thing that I think about when I'm in the studio. Like I don't create it thinking, oh, so this is going to sell. Like for me, in the beginning, I used to be like surprised when people buy the work, because like sometimes when audiences kind of engage with your work, and I don't know whether it's from them not understanding the work, or like people not open to how the work is. So, and they deem your work dark. So for me, when I create, sometimes when I create, I'm like, yo, who is going to buy this? Like. But for me, the market never even kind of like factors in. For me, I create, and I tend to kind of live with the work for a while before I even release them to the gallery, to kind of like also engage with them and see like how I feel about them. But for me, the market is very secondary. If at all it does like it does factor, in the sense that, well, eventually if the work sells, you're happier as an artist. But when I create the work, it's never the thought in mind that I'm creating this for this particular market. Yeah.
All right. So I think Dawn, if you're there, I think I'll invite you to kind of pick it up. But then just on a parting shot, one of the, and this is from thinking through the idea of maybe we should do this actually. Well, Priscilla, Charlie, were they gone?
Charlie, what they go on?
What would be the response be from you, and then Beatrice also, in a parting shot also.
Oh,
Like,
it would be
yeah,
like
what's happening?
what's happening? Not much,
Yes.
not much. Yeah, trying to stay afloat. Basically with life, learning, exploring. Yeah, trying to fulfill other projects, catching timelines, and just living life. Yeah, it's been fun.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been super.
Pleasure.
Beatrice.
Charle, what they go on? We're just trying to live in the moment and not get taken over by whatever is happening around us. We are living in what appears to be like weird times, but we're taking it a day at a time, and that's all we can do. be present for every moment that comes our way.
Right. Don?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Beatrice and Priscilla, for your time, for giving us this window into your thinking and your work, and for the gift of your work. Thank you as well, Peterson, for being an attentive interlocutor, and for allowing us to open up what it is that these artists think about with their work. And thank you to all of you who have joined us, given us our time and your attention this evening. It was a pleasure to host you. It was a pleasure to listen to you speak and get to learn more. If you'd like to catch up on this conversation again, or you'd like to listen over the conversation again, it has been recorded and we will share it on our YouTube channels. We also kindly request you to follow us on, take a look at our website, follow us on social media to keep up with future and Kai programs, talks and programs. And for those of you who have not seen the exhibition, please make a point of seeing it between now and the weekend. And let's all have a wonderful rest of our evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Priscilla. Thanks, Beatrice. It's been, yeah.
Thanks to, thanks for having us. It's our pleasure.
Actually, well, I think one of the things I kept thinking throughout was, I think that also, I think the fortitude with which you guys kind of, I think at the first room, you kind of spoke about the idea of the inside out, kind of opening and making that space accessible, I guess, for us to really look at ourselves, for us to look into issues that affect, I thought those are acts of friendship. Like, I think it takes, care and love and really that, I think that spectrum of to be able to articulate issues as strongly and as profoundly as the two of you do in your works. And definitely looking forward to seeing more exhibitions with your work, to hearing more interviews when you articulate your processes and, of course, your work. Yeah.
Thank you, Peterson.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Pleasure.